Have you ever wondered what goes through a baby elephant's mind when it feels life being crushed from its body? In the African savannas, where nature writes stories of survival every single day, there exists a type of encounter that freezes the heart of anyone who witnesses it. An encounter between absolute innocence and the deadliest predator that has ever crawled upon the earth. This is not just another wildlife story. This is the story of a tiny heart beating desperately while deadly coils tightened harder and harder. This is the story of how good and evil faced each other under the scorching African sun. And this is the story of heroes who didn't hesitate for even a second when they heard the agonizing cry of a defenseless creature. What you are about to witness changed forever everyone who was present that day. Men and women trained to face nature's most extreme dangers confessed afterward that they had never seen anything like it. Some cried. Others remained silent for hours. But everyone agreed on one thing. That day showed them the true meaning of the word courage. Imagine a baby elephant only a few weeks old, separated from its mother for the first time. Imagine the absolute terror when something cold and scaly begins to wrap around its small body. Imagine the pain when every breath becomes harder, when its lungs scream for air that can no longer enter. But also imagine the strength of the human spirit when faced with the suffering of an innocent. Imagine men and women racing against time, knowing that every second lost could mean a life fading away. Imagine the determination shining in their eyes when they decide that no creature will die while they are there. Today you will learn every detail of this impossible journey. You will feel every emotion, every moment of despair, every second of hope. You will discover how a rescue team faced one of Africa's most dangerous creatures to save one of its most adorable. And you will understand why this story needs to be told. This is the true story of how life triumphed over death. Of how love conquered fear. Of how ordinary heroes did something extraordinary. Prepare your heart. Because what you are about to witness will transform the way you see courage, compassion, and the value of every life on this planet. If you believe that every living being deserves a chance to survive, stay with us until the end. And if stories of true heroes touch your heart, you know what to do. Join our family. Because here, every life matters. And every story deserves to be heard. The morning began like any other in the Amboseli region of Kenya. The sun was rising slowly over Mount Kilimanjaro, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that seemed almost unreal. The air was still cool, carrying with it the scent of acacia trees and the red earth that stretched as far as the eye could see. In a small clearing near the Nkongo swamp, a herd of 12 elephants moved peacefully through the tall grass. The matriarch, an old and wise elephant named Nala, led her family toward a watering hole they had visited for 3 generations. Her weathered skin told stories of droughts survived and predators faced. Her eyes held the wisdom of 5 decades walking these lands. Among the herd walked little Tumalo, a 3-week-old baby elephant whose name means faith in the Swahili language. He was the youngest member of the family and also the most curious. Every bird that flew overhead was a source of wonder for him. Every stone on the path was a treasure that needed to be investigated with his little trunk. His mother, Amara, watched him with patient and loving eyes. She was a young mother, and Tumalo was her first calf. Every movement he made filled her heart with joy and concern in equal measure. She had waited years for this little one, and now that he was here, she couldn't imagine life without him. Tumalo was playful and full of energy. He would run ahead of the herd, then come back to his mother's side when something startled him. He loved splashing in the mud and trying to imitate the trumpeting sounds the older elephants made. His little legs still wobbled sometimes, but his spirit was already as strong as the ancient baobab trees that dotted the landscape. That morning, as the herd moved slowly toward the water, Tumalo noticed something interesting in the tall grass to his right. It was a cluster of wildflowers, their purple petals swaying gently in the breeze. Without thinking, as young ones often do, he veered away from the safety of the herd to investigate. Amara noticed immediately and trumpeted softly, calling him back. But Tumalo was too enchanted by the flowers to pay attention. He took a few more steps away from his mother, his little trunk reaching out to touch the purple petals. That's when everything changed. The tall grass rustled in a way that had nothing to do with the wind. There was movement there, deliberate and calculated. Something ancient and patient had been waiting in that exact spot for hours. Something that had gone days without a meal and was driven by the most primal of all instincts, hunger. The python had been coiled in the grass since before dawn. It was a massive specimen, nearly 40 feet long and weighing close to 300 pounds. Its body was as thick as a man's torso, covered in scales that shimmered with patterns of brown and gold. This was an apex predator, a creature that had lived for over 20 years and had taken down prey as large as young antelopes. Pythons don't chase their prey. They don't need to. They are masters of patience, masters of the ambush. This one had detected the vibrations of the elephant herd from a distance and had positioned itself perfectly along their path. It had been waiting for exactly this opportunity, a young one separated from the group. In the blink of an eye, the python struck. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, revealing rows of backward-curving teeth designed not to kill, but to grip. It lunged forward with surprising speed for a creature of its size, its jaws clamping down on Tumalo's small trunk. The baby elephant's scream of terror and pain shattered the peaceful morning. It was a sound that no mother should ever have to hear, a sound that spoke of pure anguish and fear. Tumalo tried to pull away, but the python's grip was like iron. Before the little elephant could even understand what was happening, the snake's massive body began to coil. The first loop wrapped around Tumalo's front legs. The second encircled his small torso. The third constricted around his hindquarters. Each coil was a muscular band of pure crushing force. Amara's response was immediate and fierce. She charged toward her baby, trumpeting at full volume, a sound of rage and desperation that echoed across the savannah. The other elephants joined her, rushing toward the scene with their ears spread wide in threat display. But the python had already locked itself in position. Its entire strategy depended on maintaining its grip and constriction until its prey could no longer breathe. It would not let go now, not when it was so close to securing a meal that would sustain it for months. The adult elephants tried everything. They trumpeted and charged. They kicked at the python with their massive feet. Nala, the matriarch, even tried to grab the snake with her trunk and pull it away. But the python's body was so tightly wrapped around little Tumalo that any attempt to forcefully remove it risked injuring the baby even more. Tumalo's cries became weaker. His eyes, which moments before had been bright with curiosity and life, now showed pure terror and confusion. Why was this happening? Where was his mother? Why couldn't he breathe? Every second that passed, the python's coils tightened. This is how these predators kill. They don't crush bones or suffocate immediately. Instead, every time their prey exhales, the snake tightens just a little more. Breath by breath, the space for air diminishes. It's a slow, methodical process that is as efficient as it is horrifying. The baby elephant's small lungs were fighting for every bit of oxygen. His little heart was racing, pumping adrenaline through his body in a desperate attempt to survive. But with each passing moment, the pressure increased. His ribs were being compressed. His circulation was being restricted. You're witnessing something that happens in the wild every single day, yet most people never see. But when you do see it, when you truly understand what's at stake, you can't look away. And neither could the people who were about to arrive. Stay with this story because what happens next will restore your faith in the goodness that still exists in this world. 12 miles away at the Amboseli Wildlife Conservation Camp, Dr. James Mwangi was reviewing field reports when his radio crackled to life. James was the head of the Regional Wildlife Rescue Team, a position he had held for 8 years. Before that, he had been a wildlife veterinarian, treating everything from wounded lions to poisoned vultures. The voice on the radio was urgent and breathless. It belonged to Samuel, a ranger who had been on routine patrol near the Nkongo-Narok swamp. What he described made James's blood run cold. A baby elephant in mortal danger, trapped in the coils of what sounded like one of the largest pythons anyone had ever seen in the region. James didn't waste a single second. He grabbed his emergency medical kit and shouted for his team. Within 90 seconds, 5 people were running toward their vehicles. There was Maria, an expert in large animal handling from Brazil who had come to Kenya 3 years ago and never left. There was Joseph and David, 2 local wildlife specialists who had grown up in villages near the park and knew the land better than anyone. And there was Sarah, a young veterinary intern from England who had arrived just 2 weeks earlier. This was supposed to be her introduction to wildlife conservation work. Instead, she was about to face one of the most challenging rescues imaginable. The team's Land Cruiser tore across the rough terrain at dangerous speeds. Every bump and pothole threatened to flip the vehicle, but James kept his foot pressed firmly on the accelerator. They all knew what was at stake. They all knew that every second counted. James had responded to hundreds of wildlife emergencies over the years. He had treated lions with infected wounds, relocated elephants from human settlements, and even once helped free a young giraffe whose leg had been caught in a poacher's snare. But he had never dealt with a python attack on an elephant calf. The size difference, the constriction force involved, the delicate nature of the baby elephant's body, all of it made this an incredibly complex rescue. As they drove, Maria was already calculating in her mind. How would they approach the snake? What tools would they need? How could they remove the python without causing more injury to the elephant? The questions raced through her mind faster than the vehicle raced across the savannah. Sarah, sitting in the back seat, felt her hands trembling. She had trained for years to become a wildlife veterinarian. She had studied animal behavior, learned surgical techniques, and prepared herself mentally for the challenges of working in the field. But nothing in any textbook had prepared her for this moment. The radio crackled again. Samuel's voice was even more urgent now. The baby elephant's struggles were weakening. The herd was becoming increasingly agitated, and there was a real danger they might charge anyone who approached. Time was running out faster than anyone wanted to admit. When they finally arrived at the scene, the sight that greeted them was something none of them would ever forget. The adult elephants had formed a protective circle, but they were clearly in distress. Their trunks waved in agitation, and they shifted their massive feet nervously. In the center of all this, barely visible through the wall of gray bodies, was little Tumalo. James approached slowly, speaking in soft, calm tones. He had worked with elephants long enough to know that they understood more than people gave them credit for. They could sense intentions. They could tell friend from foe. He needed them to understand that he was there to help. Nala, the matriarch, watched him with ancient, intelligent eyes. She trumpeted once, a sound that wasn't quite threatening but wasn't welcoming either. It was a warning: approach with care or face the consequences. Maria moved to James's left, carrying a long pole with a hook at the end. Joseph and David fanned out to the sides, ready to assist in whatever way was needed. Sarah stayed close to the vehicle, preparing the medical supplies they would need if they freed the baby elephant. When James finally got a clear view of the situation, his heart sank. The python was even larger than Samuel had described. Its body was wrapped so tightly around Tumalo that the baby elephant's skin was changing color in places where circulation was being cut off. The little one's breathing was shallow and rapid, each breath a visible struggle. The python's head was partially hidden beneath one of its own coils, but its eyes were visible, cold, unblinking, focused only on maintaining its death grip. This was a creature operating purely on instinct, with no malice and no mercy. It was simply doing what evolution had designed it to do: survive. James made his assessment quickly. They had maybe 10 to 15 minutes before the baby elephant's condition became critical. The constriction was already severe, and every passing second increased the risk of internal injuries, oxygen deprivation, or cardiac arrest. The team moved into position. Their plan was dangerous and had to be executed with precision. Maria would use the hooked pole to try to catch the python's head and pull it away from Tumalo's trunk. At the same moment, James and Joseph would work on unwrapping the coils, starting from the tail end and moving toward the head. David would monitor the adult elephants, ready to warn the team if any of them decided to charge. But there was a problem. The python was so large and so powerful that even with multiple people working together, they might not be able to overpower it. And any mistake, any moment of hesitation, could result in the snake tightening its grip even more. James looked at his team. He saw determination in Maria's eyes, resolve in Joseph's expression, and courage in the way Sarah had stepped forward, ready to help despite her inexperience. These were people who had dedicated their lives to protecting wildlife, and they weren't about to let a baby elephant die on their watch. He gave the signal and they moved as one. Maria's pole shot forward, the hook catching the python just behind its head. The snake reacted instantly, thrashing violently and trying to free itself. But Maria held firm, using all her strength and body weight to keep the pole steady. James and Joseph grabbed the python's massive tail section and began trying to unwrap it from Tumalo's hindquarters. The snake's muscles were like steel cables, resisting every attempt to loosen them. It took every ounce of strength they had just to move the coil a few inches. Tumalo cried out weakly, a sound that tore at everyone's hearts. The baby elephant's eyes found his mother's, and in that gaze was a question no young creature should ever have to ask: "Am I going to die?" Amara trumpeted back, a sound filled with anguish and helplessness. She wanted desperately to help her baby, but she understood in some instinctive way that these humans were trying to do what she could not. The struggle continued. James's hands were bleeding from gripping the python's rough scales. Joseph's muscles screamed with the effort of trying to unwrap coil after coil. Maria's arms shook as she maintained her grip on the pole, preventing the snake's head from finding a new angle to attack. And then, in a moment of terrible clarity, they all realized something. The python was tightening its grip even more in response to their interference. Tumalo's breathing became even more labored. His small body was beginning to go limp. They were losing him. Sarah saw it happening and made a split-second decision. She grabbed a heavy blanket from the medical kit and ran forward, throwing it over the python's head. Pythons hunt primarily by sensing heat and vibrations. By covering its head and disrupting its senses, she hoped to confuse the snake long enough for the team to make progress. It worked. The python's thrashing became less coordinated. Its grip loosened just slightly, but it was enough. James and Joseph seized the moment, pulling hard on the coils and finally managing to unwrap them from Tumulo's torso. One coil off, then two, then three. The python, sensing it was losing its prey, made one final desperate attempt to maintain its grip. It lunged toward Tumulo's head, jaws opening wide. But Maria was ready. She yanked hard on the pole, pulling the snake's head away at the last possible second. Joseph grabbed the python's midsection and threw his full body weight into pulling it away from the baby elephant. David joined him, and together they dragged the massive snake several feet away from Tumulo. James immediately knelt beside the baby elephant, his hands moving quickly to assess the damage. Tumulo's breathing was dangerously shallow. There were deep pressure marks around his torso where the snake had constricted. His pulse was rapid and weak. Sarah was already there with oxygen and medical supplies. Her hands, which had been trembling in the vehicle, were now steady and sure. Training and instinct had taken over. She helped James position the oxygen mask over Tumulo's small trunk while Maria and the others kept the python at bay. The team worked with desperate efficiency. Every second mattered. Every breath that Tumulo managed to take was a small victory. James checked for broken ribs, internal bleeding, and signs of shock. Sarah monitored vital signs and prepared medications. Maria, still holding the pole to keep the python under control, called for additional help on the radio. Tumulo's eyes flickered. His breathing was still weak, but it was there. He was alive. Barely, but alive. Amara had been watching everything from just a few feet away. Now, as the immediate danger passed, she stepped forward slowly. Her trunk reached out gently, touching her baby's face, checking him, reassuring him that she was there. The python, realizing its meal was lost, began to slither away into the tall grass. It had fought hard but had ultimately failed. Such is the nature of survival in the wild. Sometimes you eat, sometimes you don't. The snake would find other prey eventually. But for now, all attention was on Tumulo. The little elephant was severely traumatized and injured, but he was breathing. His eyes, though clouded with pain and fear, were still showing signs of awareness. James made the decision quickly. They needed to transport Tumulo to the conservation camp where they had better medical equipment and could monitor him properly. But moving a baby elephant, even a small one, was no simple task. And they would have to do it with the permission and cooperation of Amara and the herd. What happened next surprised everyone, even James with all his years of experience. Nala, the matriarch, trumpeted once and then stepped back, making a clear path. It was as if she understood that these humans had saved Tumulo's life and could be trusted to care for him further. Amara was more reluctant. Every maternal instinct told her not to let her baby out of her sight. But she too seemed to understand at some deep level that Tumulo needed help she couldn't provide. When James gently guided the baby elephant toward the vehicle, Amara followed but didn't interfere. What you're seeing here is something precious and rare. You're seeing the moment when different species recognize their common bond. The will to protect the young, the innocent, the vulnerable. This is what makes us all part of the same family on this planet. And if this story has touched something in your heart, know that you're not alone. Others are feeling it too. Others are choosing to be part of something bigger. Join us. Be a voice for those who cannot speak for themselves. Be a light in the darkness. Because together we can make sure stories like Tumulo's have happy endings. The journey back to camp was tense. Tumulo lay in the back of the vehicle, wrapped in blankets and with an oxygen mask secured over his trunk. Sarah sat with him, one hand gently stroking his head, monitoring his vitals constantly. Every bump in the road made her wince, worried about causing more pain to the already traumatized baby. James drove carefully but quickly. Behind them, in sight that would have been unbelievable if someone hadn't captured it on video, Amara and several members of the herd were actually following the vehicle. They maintained a distance of about 100 yards, but they were clearly keeping track of where their youngest member was being taken. At the camp, Dr. Patricia Chin, the senior veterinarian, was already preparing the treatment area. Patricia was a legend in wildlife conservation circles. She had worked in 6 countries across 3 continents and had saved more animals than most people would see in a lifetime. Her hands were steady, her mind was sharp, and her heart was wholly dedicated to the creatures she served. When the vehicle arrived, Patricia took one look at Tumalo and immediately began issuing orders. The baby elephant was carefully moved onto a large padded platform. And 4-line was established to provide fluids and medications. X-rays were taken to check for broken ribs or internal injuries. Every system was checked, every wound was documented, every possible complication was anticipated. The news was both good and bad. Tumalo had no broken bones, which was almost miraculous considering the force of the python's constriction. But he had significant bruising to his organs, particularly his lungs and heart. His circulation had been compromised for long enough to cause tissue damage in several areas. And most concerning, he was showing signs of severe psychological trauma. Animals, like humans, can suffer from post-traumatic stress. The terror of those minutes in the python's grip had left marks not just on Tumalo's body, but on his mind and spirit. He was listless and unresponsive, his eyes dull with what could only be described as despair. Patricia had seen this before in animals who had survived violent attacks. The body could heal, but the spirit was sometimes harder to mend. Tumalo would need not just medical care but emotional support and comfort. That's when Amara made her presence known. The mother elephant had followed all the way to the camp and was now standing at the fence, trumpeting softly but persistently. She wanted her baby. She needed to know he was all right. James made another difficult decision. Normally they would keep a patient isolated to reduce stress and prevent infection. But in this case, separating Tumalo from his mother might cause more harm than good. He gave orders to open a section of the enclosure and allow Amara inside. What happened when mother and baby were reunited brought tears to the eyes of every person present. Amara rushed to Tumalo's side and immediately began examining him with her trunk, touching every part of his body, reassuring herself that he was still alive. Her vocalizations were soft and tender, the kind of sounds only a mother makes. And Tumalo responded. For the first time since the attack, his eyes showed a spark of life. His small trunk reached up to touch his mother's face. He made a weak sound, but it was a sound of recognition and relief. Over the next few hours, as medications took effect and Tumalo's breathing stabilized, the little elephant remained close to his mother. Amara never left his side, not even for a moment. She stood over him protectively, her massive body blocking the sun to keep him comfortable, her trunk constantly touching him to reassure him of her presence. The team worked around both elephants, checking vitals, administering medications and monitoring progress. Patricia was cautiously optimistic. Tumalo was responding well to treatment, and his vital signs were gradually improving. But he wasn't out of danger yet. The next 24 hours would be critical. As night fell over the camp, James and his team finally had a moment to breathe. They were exhausted, covered in dust and blood, their muscles aching from the intense physical effort of the rescue. But they were also filled with a profound sense of accomplishment. They had saved a life today. They had stood between death and innocence and had refused to let darkness win. In a world that often seems filled with cruelty and indifference, they had proven that compassion still matters, that courage still exists, and that every life has value. Sarah, the young intern, sat on the steps of the medical facility and finally allowed herself to cry. These weren't tears of sadness, but of release, of overwhelming emotion finally finding an outlet. She had come to Africa to learn about wildlife conservation, and today she had learned the most important lesson of all, that the work they did wasn't just about science or medicine. It was about love. It was about standing up for creatures who couldn't stand up for themselves. Maria joined her on the steps, putting an arm around her shoulders. No words were needed. They had both witnessed something extraordinary, and they would both carry this day with them for the rest of their lives. Inside the enclosure, Tumalo had finally fallen into a deep sleep, his small body pressed against his mother's leg. Amara stood watch over him, her eyes never closing, her vigilance absolute. She would protect him through this night and every night to come. She had come so close to losing him, and she would never take his presence for granted again. The stars came out over the African savanna, millions of them glittering in the vast darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a lion roared. Nearby, a family of hyenas called to each other. The sounds of the night echoed across the ancient land, reminding everyone that life continued, that the circle remained unbroken. Days turned into weeks. Tumalo's recovery was slow but steady. The physical wounds healed first. The bruising faded, the circulation returned to normal, the compressed organs regained their function. But the emotional healing took longer. 4 days after the attack, Tumalo stayed close to his mother, unwilling to venture more than a few feet away from her protective presence. The curiosity that had once led him to investigate purple flowers and chase butterflies was gone, replaced by a fearful wariness of everything around him. Patricia worked closely with Tumalo during this time, using techniques she had learned from animal psychologists and from her own decades of experience. She spoke to him softly, moved slowly around him, and gradually helped him understand that he was safe. The turning point came almost 2 weeks after the attack. Tumalo was in the enclosure with his mother when a butterfly landed on a nearby flower. It was a beautiful creature with wings of blue and orange, and it fluttered gently in the morning breeze. Everyone held their breath as Tumalo noticed it. Would he retreat in fear? Would the sight of something in the grass trigger memories of the python? Or would the natural curiosity of a young elephant reassert itself? Slowly, hesitantly, Tumalo took a step toward the butterfly. Then another. His small trunk reached out, not quite touching the flower, but close enough to catch the butterfly's scent. The butterfly flew away, dancing through the air, and something remarkable happened. Tumalo followed it, taking a few playful steps, his eyes bright with interest. Amara watched her baby with what could only be described as joy. Her little one was coming back to her, not just physically but emotionally. The spirit that had been crushed under the python's coils was slowly being restored. The team celebrated this small but significant milestone. They had saved Tumalo's body, but now they were witnessing the healing of his spirit, and that was perhaps even more meaningful. 3 weeks after the attack, Patricia declared Tumalo healthy enough to rejoin his herd in the wild. It was a bittersweet moment for everyone at the camp. They had grown attached to the little elephant, had invested their hearts and souls into his recovery, and now they had to say goodbye. But this was always the goal. The purpose of rescue and rehabilitation was to return animals to their natural habitat, to give them back the freedom that was their birthright. Keeping Tumalo would have been selfish no matter how much they loved him. The morning of his release, the entire camp gathered to watch. The gates of the enclosure were opened, and Amara led her baby out slowly, testing his readiness, making sure he was truly prepared for this moment. Tumalo hesitated at the threshold. This place had become familiar, had represented safety during his most vulnerable time. But beyond the gates lay the wide savanna, the place where he truly belonged. Amara trumpeted softly, encouragingly. And then from somewhere in the distance came an answer. It was Nala and the rest of the herd calling them home. That call seemed to awaken something deep inside Tumalo. He straightened his small body, raised his trunk, and with growing confidence, walked through the gate. Each step took him farther from the safety of the camp and closer to the wild world that was his heritage. The herd was waiting at the edge of the clearing. When they saw Amara and Tumalo approaching, they erupted in celebration. Trunks waved in the air, voices rang out across the savanna, and the family closed around their returning members in a circle of gray bodies and unconditional love. Tumalo was passed from one family member to another, each elephant touching him with their trunk, welcoming him back, reassuring him of his place in the family. He was home. He was safe. He was loved. James and his team watched from a distance, using binoculars to follow the reunion. There were tears on many faces, but they were good tears, the kind that come from witnessing something pure and beautiful in a world that often seems too harsh. Sarah, the intern who had been so nervous during the rescue, stood beside James and said something that perfectly captured the moment. "This is why we do it. This is why it all matters." James nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. She was right. This was why they endured the long hours, the dangerous situations, the heartbreaking failures, and the limited resources. For moments like this. For the chance to give life a fighting chance. As the elephants moved away, heading deeper into the park, Tumalo looked back one final time. His eyes found the humans who had saved him, who had refused to let him die, who had given him back his future. There was no way to know if he understood what they had done for him, if he would remember them. But in that last look, there seemed to be a spark of recognition, perhaps even gratitude. And then he turned and followed his family into the golden grass, a small gray figure among larger ones, vulnerable but protected, innocent but learning, a living testament to the power of courage and compassion. The python that attacked Tumalo was later found by rangers and relocated to a different area of the park, far from the elephant migration routes. It wasn't punished, it had done nothing wrong by the laws of nature. It was simply following its instincts, trying to survive in the same way every creature does. But it was removed from a situation where another tragedy might occur. In the months that followed, James and his team continued their work, responding to countless other emergencies, saving other lives. Not every story had a happy ending. They lost patients to injuries too severe to heal, to diseases that couldn't be cured, to the simple reality that sometimes nature is cruel and there's nothing anyone can do to change that. But they also had victories. They freed a young giraffe from a poacher's snare. They treated a lion with an infected wound until it healed completely. They rescued a family of wildebeests trapped by floodwaters. Each success reminded them why they had chosen this difficult path, why they continued to fight even when the odds seemed impossible. Sarah stayed in Kenya after her internship ended. She had found her calling in that moment of crisis when Tumalo needed her, and she wasn't about to walk away from it now. She became a full member of the team, bringing fresh energy and new ideas, carrying forward the legacy of compassion that she had witnessed firsthand. Maria continued her work with the same dedication she had always shown, but now with an added understanding of just how much one moment of courage could mean. She trained other rescuers, sharing her knowledge and experience, making sure that when the next crisis came, and it would come, there would be people ready to respond. Patricia, the senior veterinarian, added Tumalo's story to her collection of memories, another chapter in a career filled with remarkable moments. She knew she wouldn't be able to do this work forever, but as long as her hands were steady and her mind was sharp, she would continue to fight for the creatures who needed her. And Tumalo himself? He grew. He thrived. He learned the ways of the elephant, guided by his mother and his extended family. The scars on his body faded with time, and while the memory of that terrible day probably never left him completely, it didn't define him. He became strong, playful, and curious again, exploring his world with the joy that all young creatures deserve to experience. Researchers who studied the herd reported seeing him months later, now twice the size he had been during the attack, wrestling with other young elephants, splashing in watering holes and living a full and happy life. He had been given a second chance and he was making the most of it. The story of Tumalo's rescue spread beyond the conservation community. News outlets picked it up. Social media shared it. People around the world were moved by the tale of the baby elephant and the humans who refused to let him die. But more than just touching hearts, the story changed minds. It reminded people that wildlife conservation isn't some abstract concept carried out by scientists in distant lands. It's immediate and personal and vital. It's about individual lives, each one precious, each one worth fighting for. It's about maintaining the delicate balance of ecosystems that we all depend on, whether we realize it or not. Donations to wildlife rescue organizations increased. More people volunteered for conservation work. Schools added wildlife education to their curricula. The ripple effects of one rescue, one moment of courage, spread far beyond anyone could have anticipated. Because that's the thing about hope, it's contagious. When people see proof that compassion can overcome cruelty, that dedication can defeat despair, that love can triumph over loss, they want to be part of that story. They want to contribute to a world where such miracles are possible. And so we come to the end of this story, but really it's not an ending at all. It's an invitation. An invitation to be part of something bigger than yourself. To stand up for those who cannot stand alone. To refuse to accept that cruelty and indifference are the only options in this world. Tumalo's story isn't just about a baby elephant and the people who saved him. It's about all of us and the choice we make every day about what kind of world we want to live in. If this story moved you, don't let that feeling fade. Turn it into action. Share this message. Support the work of conservation heroes. Speak up for the voiceless. Because every life matters. Every story deserves to be told. And every one of us has the power to make a difference. Join our family. Be the change. Be the hope. Be the reason another miracle becomes possible.